Warning: racism, acts of hateful violence, graphic events, and other triggering imagery may be mentioned in this podcast. Listener discretion is advised. And welcome, everybody. My name is Lawrence, and you're listening to APN's Waveform. So I try to keep this podcast casual, if not lighthearted. As you've heard, we usually focus on the more interesting aspects of APN production life, but there are some moments when our personal lives get wrapped up in our news reporting as well. Unfortunately, the rise in anti-Asian racism is one of those moments. APN has covered this despicable national development in what is now a 3-part series, and this podcast episode is an extension of that coverage. In that it takes a more personal look at the sentiments not just within APN, but our community in general. So this week I'm joined by Kathy Leo and Swetha Somasundaram, both of whom are quite vocal on issues like the one we are talking about today. Now, before we start, I would like to credit the organizers behind the Stop Asian Hate Arcadia event hosted by the Arcadia Civic Youth Council for forming the discussion questions that guide this conversation. Let's get going. So, usually because I'm terrible at introducing people, why don't I have any one of you two start by introducing yourselves, name, grade, perhaps, and I guess what you know about this current situation, or I guess your expertise or whatever.
Okay, hi, I'm Swetha Somasundaram. I'm a current junior at Arcadia High School. In terms of like what I know about the hate crimes that have occurred recently, not all too much, because I do stay a little bit away from media just because it's a little bit hurtful at this time, but quite enough to vocalize the issues that we do have in our community and just speaking about what we could do to better it.
All right, Cassie?
Hi everyone, my name is Kathy Liu, and like Swetha, I am also a junior at Arcadia High School. As for the Asian violence currently going on, I would also have to echo Swetha's sentiment where I am not 100% caught up with everything in the news, but I definitely have seen those clips circulated on YouTube, on Instagram, that a lot of peers our age are sending out nowadays to raise awareness for the Stop Asian Hate movement. And I think it's just probably like, I try to stay away from media, like Swetha said, because with Black Lives Matter movement in the summer and then followed by the Stop Asian Hate, and Black Lives Matter is still going on. So personally, I just feel really disappointed in the way that society is kind of functioning at the moment, because violence is definitely not going to solve any issues at the moment.
All right, yeah. Thank you, Kathy. And you just hopped right into our first segment right there. So I guess, how are you feeling? How are all of you feeling, given the rise in anti-Asian violence in our communities? I think we'll go to Swetha for this one. If you could unmute your mics, just so we could... No worry, it's fine. Yeah.
I think like overall it's kind of just, frustrating. It does not feel like we have a lot of hope at the moment. I think like the main thing is politicians say they share our grief, but being powerful leaders and holding this position in society, they aren't really taking that much action to actually condone and stop these hate crimes publicly, and it's definitely very irritating. I live across a public park, and it's pretty much open right now, so a lot of my neighbors are Asian, and it's very, I fear for their lives as well as my parents and my family in general, just their lives. I haven't really kept up with the news, like I said earlier. It's just, mentally exhausting, and I deleted social media quite a bit of times just to stay away a little bit and come back when I feel ready to.
I definitely have to agree on that. Just, as a former Quiz Bowl and History Bowl member, I say former because I quit in junior year. I can't keep studying. My whole life can't just be studying textbooks. All right, there's a difference between like a nerd and a geek. Like, I personally identify as a geek. Anyway, let me get back to the issue here. But I think just looking over American history and Asian culture so many times, I keep seeing this whole like anti-Asian thing, the yellow peril, the yellow fever, and just this these tropes and these stereotypes coming up over and over again. And at this point, I'm exasperated. I'm pessimistic. It doesn't feel like there's much hope anymore. And again, as Swetha, as you said, like, the politicians, they keep offering their best wishes. Our hearts go out to the victims of da 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 and stuff like that. And I'm like, but where's the action? Words are words, but if you're going to act now. It's been too long. Yeah, Kathy, you could just go ahead. Just don't worry. You don't have to unmute. Just fire away.
Awesome. Lawrence, you brought up and Swetha, she brought up the point first about politicians not really doing that much. If I'm going to be really blunt, I'm just completely disgusted by everything that's going on, especially because of the fact that so many of the clips that I've seen online is they're attacking elderly people, which I'm just that is not the group of people to attack. That's just like, no matter what race they are, no matter what, that's just horrific to me.
It's a low blow.
Exactly. And going back to the thing about politics, not to undercut any of Black Lives Matter, their movement or any of that, but I am, as an Asian myself, I am slightly disappointed by, especially with the shootings that happened a month ago. There was just, for that brief 1 week period, there was this huge surge in let's stand by Asians, let's support who they are, all of that. And then a week later, boom, it was just gone. And for Black Lives Matter, it's a much bigger movement, which I'm not saying that Stop Asian Hate should be compared to that. I don't want it to be compared. They're completely different movements, and each of them have their own reasons that they're ongoing. But I just wish that there would just be a little bit more attention to the Stop Asian Hate movement, especially because this is stemming directly from coronavirus, which is probably the biggest issue that we have on our hands at the moment.
For sure. And I think in part, I have to call out the media there, even though we are doing this for a media group, APN, but I have to call out the media here. It's more like the national media or the mainstream media, which, let's be frank, no one really likes anymore. Like, it is infuriating to see how little they cover this and how willing people are to just call it a one-time thing, or it's this, especially the Atlanta shootings, where it's like, oh, this guy, he had I won't repeat it I'll try and like paraphrase it to make it more kid friendly, but he had certain urges. Oh, these urges were driving him on. Like, no, we know why he was there. We know exactly why he targeted these people, and it's because of a long-running stereotype, especially against Asian women and females as well.
Which is something that I want to say that in some of our classes, we did have discussions about this. And what I was really baffled about, I won't name names, but one of my teachers did say that they were grateful that his urges were not for anti-Asian sentiments, which I was really baffled by, because what the teacher said was that the person had a grudge against the salon itself. And I was like, it's not really just by the salon itself. I mean, that's maybe how the media might have played it off, but as an Asian myself, and just by looking at the names, the people he targeted, I'm like, it is very, very clear that maybe it was a grudge against the salon, but you cannot undercut like the underlying connection between the salon and the people that work there and the people that he targeted.
And and then especially as this thing goes on, we're seeing, like, I think, especially because when we think anti-Asian hate, it's a lot like, most people think, oh, the East Asian persona, the East Asian sort of thing, it's just them. But I think, as we saw in the FedEx shooting as well, the South Asian voices definitely need to be included as well in this conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I think like there's this stereotypical Asian sentiment that people have, and people do, tend to cut away from the South Asian side, and not really, see that, all these South Asians are also Asians, and we are, agreeing with these sentiments, and we feel this, and we're feeling this pain, and these grievances. And I think, a lot of people do push us aside, thinking that South Asians are not Asians and don't really, deserve to be feeling this grief, when I do think that, we're feeling this grief a little bit more because we've been pushed aside for so long that this grief is just a lot more than we can handle at the moment.
Definitely. I think we all have to stand united, even as broad as the term Asian American may be. I think this is one of those moments where we finally, as like a I don't want to, a racial block. That sounds really messed up. But like as a block, as a social block, this is finally the time that I'm starting to see that hopeful union of East Asian, South Asian, just everyone's finally getting their voices considered, and we're seeing that beautiful tapestry in representation. And seeing how like all three of us, the moment we start talking about this, we're in the heat of the moment, we're popping off. And I was just wondering, how have y'all stayed grounded during this time? And I guess, what are some of the ways that you've been processing the grief and the everyday violence our communities face?
The way that I'm going about it is that I've just been avoiding the morning news, which is a lot easier now. Back when we were still going to school in person, the first thing that I did every morning when my parents were driving me to school was that you'd be listening to the morning news. And I remember very clearly, like starting in like early middle school, maybe around 6th grade, when I really started paying attention to the news, I was just like, every morning there was something negative in the news, and I was like, this was just not the way I wanted to start my day. So I've been avoiding that, which is a lot easier now. And then honestly, I'm a little bit guilty that like I'm not as well kept up with current events as I would like to, because with online and everything, it's very difficult to keep up with my studies. So the way that I'm staying grounded is more of during study sessions when my friends and I will talk, we'll finish our homework, and then along the way we'll just like pepper each other with questions, just random conversations. And usually, especially with all of these movements going on, somehow these more difficult and controversial topics will find their way into our own conversations.
And I definitely agree with Kathy on being slightly guilty that we haven't been able to, completely involve ourselves in this current events. But I've definitely, stayed away from social media, like I said a little bit earlier, sometimes weeks at a time, just to let myself recharge a little bit. It's very, very draining when it comes to when all of these, bad or negative thoughts come to our attention on a more frequent basis. So I tend to turn off news notifications and just stay away from any sort of mainstream media, just to ensure my safety and my mental health, just to make sure that I can get more accurate information when I'm ready to hear about it. And a lot of my grief has definitely been in anger. So I've kind of taken all of that energy and poured it into some of my passion projects, and really focused on a lot of the organizations I'm involved in, and really putting myself out there and focusing on what I want to do, rather than, grieving and just sitting there and drowning in my, pain and grief, basically.
And transitioning off of that, that's basically what I'm doing right now. I know it's not healthy, but I think just as a political nerd, I keep the first thing I do in the morning is often I open up, I have Apple News on my phone. Just the first thing I do when I unlock it, I have this desperate urge to just click it. Mm-hmm. It's draining to see all the news flood in, and it's I will say it's contributed to my senioritis as a senior. Mm-hmm. Just I'm like what's the point of it all? But I still have to keep my grades up, and so that's also why I keep living my life. And APs are coming up in a few weeks, a few days. Yeah, a few weeks. So I have to keep going. I keep pushing myself, going, hey, maybe there's something at the end of the light. But as Swetha, you actually brought up an interesting thing: passion projects. What are some of the passion projects you're doing right now, I guess, to That's a very interesting thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually part of like a whole bunch of different organizations on campus and off campus. On campus, just a couple of clubs. I'm part of Refine Your Mind Club, which is definitely just a mental health club that was created this year, practically in light of COVID, and has definitely been really helpful for me. I did this one presentation on mental health and the stigmas behind it, and it really helped me just um, recharge myself and be like, hey, it's okay to feel what you're feeling right now. It's normal, it's healthy, just let yourself feel it and go through the motions. It's okay. I think that was very, very helpful for me. Adding on to that, I'm also part of a nonprofit organization called Wave Learning Festival, and they've been very, very helpful. It's focused on educational inequities and helping other schools and organizations that, just cannot help their students in light of COVID just because they don't have the technological devices to do so, or they just don't have the manpower to help their students as much as Arcadia does. And it has definitely let me like see the privilege that I hold, and just be able to help my community and other communities within the United States, even internationally. Just being there for people and being this person that can actually make a change in the world. And it has definitely helped my self-esteem quite a bit. So yeah.
I think that's amazing what you're doing, and especially since it's so like, you're still contributing to the community, especially given all this hate, given all this this ugliness that's in this world, and you're instead you're outputting this positive vibe and this positive sentiment. And I think that's something that's really, I think it's one of the, and I think we'll delve into that later when we're talking about how to combat prejudice, but I think that's definitely something that a lot of people should definitely consider to do during this time. And I think we're seeing it as more volunteer organizations are sprouting up to help during the pandemic. Kathy, I understand that you're co-captain of badminton. So has badminton played a role in just sort of helping you de-stress, if it even helps you de-stress in a way, given how competitive
Definitely.
it is?
I mean, badminton is a very fast moving sport, so once you get like adrenaline pumping, it just kind of like takes your mind off of things. Like for badminton, we play because of the speed that the game moves, it's like half instinct, half thought. So you really, like when I'm playing badminton, you really don't have much time to think about much else. So it's just those maybe like 3-4 times a week, where that like block of maybe 1 to 2 hours period of time where I'm just like focusing on a game rather than, let's say, schoolwork, current events, other things I'm stressed about. Badminton definitely has helped. And it doesn't hurt that you go and hit a bird up to like 60 kilometers per hour. It's like, it's a very cathartic experience.
No, yeah, definitely. I remember when we did that April Fool's show, it was very cathartic for us to, for those of you who don't know, and mostly for I keep Swetha, right? Swetha.
Yes, Swetha.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
No
I
worries,
totally
don't worry
blanked.
about it.
I think just it was very cathartic to jump up and slam a birdie down, even though I missed it. I missed the birdie like 5,000 bajillion times. We did an April Fool's special thing on APN, and we had I invited Kathy over to participate, and it was fun. Very, very fun. Lots of anime references. It's cringe, but I think it's probably the best thing I could do heading into April and spring break. Speaking of breaks, we're going to head to a quick break. Again, I want to thank the Arcadia Civic Youth Council for providing me the materials needed to drive this episode. Last Saturday, on April 24th, the Arcadia Civic Youth Council, alongside several community members, hosted a virtual rally that featured multiple speakers discussing anti-Asian hate in America and its implications for the San Gabriel Valley. I personally attended the event, and frankly, it was very comforting to witness the united front that our community had against hateful sentiments. Furthermore, the small discussion groups that were hosted right after the speaker sessions were an emotional de-stressor as well. If you wish to view the recording of the speakers that spoke at this amazing event, check out the link in the description for this episode. All right, everyone, welcome back. Welcome back to the Chapter 8 of the Season 2 of this podcast thingamajig. It's 9:30 p.m. this Tuesday, April 27th, and so I'm not saying we should breeze through this last half, because this is a very important conversation, but I don't want Kathy and Swetha here to stay up all night because of this podcast. Anyway, I think we were touching upon a more lighthearted note in terms of this whole thing around anti-Asian racism and how it brings the community together. And so, speaking of that togetherness, what does solidarity, collective care, and community support look like to you?
I'll go ahead and get started. For me, in school, especially because virtual school has definitely been very draining. Especially the past 2 months have been especially draining. A lot of my teachers or a couple of my teachers have actually taken some time out of class, like 15 minutes. We'll talk about the current events and have a conversation about all these events and how it's draining us. And it definitely gave me a little bit of comfort, and I didn't feel alone, especially with all of my classmates regarding the same sentiments that I had. Two of my teachers have also made it a good point to let us know it's okay to take a couple extra days on assignments. Definitely just being like, hey, your mental health is more important than finishing an assignment right now, especially if your grades are, not going to be so dependent on those assignments. It really doesn't matter. And it definitely helps. My mental turmoil has, decreased. And it really, really helps. Just, assignments wise, it's not too much of a anymore. Meetings like the ACYC's Stop Asian Hate Rally, that was very, very helpful. I think it kind of just allows the community to come together and talk about all the issues that we see and we hear. And it kind of just gets the opinion of a multitude of people. And we kind of just, see what others want to ensure their safety. And it's kind of just my safety and your safety, and what can we do together, and what can we do to, make that care really open and see what others need as well. But mainly, I think just, talking it out with family and friends has, definitely is something that helps. I think many of us are dealing with this pain right now.
Yeah, for sure.
We all grieve differently. And I think, having a group of people that can listen to you and understand your grievances, or a group of people that have the same grieving methods, I think that gives everyone a sense of comfort. And that's definitely, something that I look for in support.
Yeah, I'm definitely not as lucky as Swetha. My tutors have not given me homework extensions, but still, my teachers have also provided definitely open spaces for us to talk about the current events that are going on. Just 10-15 minutes sometimes during class, if anybody has any current events they want to share, any checking up on us, how our weekend went, how the day's going, things like that. To me, I feel like solidarity starts small. We mentioned this in the first half of the podcast about understanding the diversity of the Asian narrative. It's not just people that potentially look like me. It's there's so many Asians out there. There's South Asians, there's Central Asians, there's Eastern Asians. There's so many out there. And each of them come from very, very different cultures. And so I feel like I can't necessarily speak for all Asians because of that, but for me, I feel like solidarity begins small by understanding how diverse our narrative is. As somebody who is still being raised in a very, very traditional Chinese household, I was taught from very young age that as a girl, I should be humble, I should be quiet, and know when it's not my time to speak. It is rough, especially when you're a Chinese girl growing up in a very American society. So I feel like as somebody I came here at the age of 1.5. So I would say that my American side of me, my Chinese side of me, I don't have much trouble managing either side. But for some people who have come here later than I have, potentially when they were a bit older, that struggle is much more different, and potentially those very traditional values will outweigh the American influences. And for these people, when anti-Asian hate comes along, most of them take it lying down. And for them, I feel like solidarity is not necessarily confrontation. For them, it might be a very uncomfortable process. So I just feel like the first thing to do is to understand where is everything coming from, rather than stepping out onto the streets and holding large scale rallies, because potentially, because this cultures are so different, maybe this isn't the way that people are comfortable with having it being dealt with.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, definitely, because and I think that just comes down to, I guess, just sort of the formation of our communities and the history behind them. Like if we compare, again, not to say that they're both equal in consideration, but as a comparison, and just so we understand the differences, so that the Black community has been defined by the legacy of discrimination, segregation, and most of all slavery. And so it was, I get you could say that community was born out of fire. It was definitely forged in fire, birthed from fire, and there's more of an incentive there to definitely be proactive, to stand united, to raise the black fist of justice, the black glove of justice, and to really make that noise. As compared to the Asian community, most of our parents, and especially, well, I think, yeah, just the forerunners of our community came here as immigrants. And so I think the goal back then especially was assimilation, to get to know your new home as best as possible, to blend in and to build a new life, because oftentimes many of them came with nothing. Most likely it came with nothing or very few support, or at the most, or at least just like their family's super far away and they have no support system. And so the goal was survival, not necessarily rallying around a revolutionary cause. But and I think when our parents and our I don't want to say like ancestors, that sounds super old, but when our parents came here, first, second generation people, and they face this racism, it's natural instinct to lash up, but they understand that they also have to try and survive. The goal is to survive, not necessarily, I guess in this case, security comes before your freedoms and your rights. So it's just keep your head down, ignore all the noise, and you push on. I feel like now that that generation has had children, and that's us right now. I think we're more grounded in a sense that we're more accustomed to the American system. It's not just our families here, but for a while it's that we are U.S. citizens and we are a part of this great nation. And so now it's more speaking out, and now it's about, like, our parents have survived for us, and that's great, and it's now time for us to finally, like, achieve our place, and to really stand up for our community during this time. And I have to thank Hassan Minhaj for that idea. Actually, he espoused it in quite a few Patriot Act episodes, and in his special comedy special Homecoming King. And I think after rewatching it, especially during these times, I think I found sort of my idea of solidarity. And it's like what Kathy said, it starts small. It definitely starts small, like within the family, within friends. But I think as the situation continues, we start to build these larger networks. We start attending more things. Like Swetha attended the ACYC Stop Asian Hate rally, and getting that opportunity to meet others within the community and seeing that whole unifying presence, I think, are the building blocks of what will become something as bold and as I guess revolutionary as Black Lives Matter, but in a totally different way. And I think to wrap that up, finally approaching our last segment, because we've talked about how to build community, how to build solidarity, and the different ways that it manifests. And so finally, my final question to you two is what are action steps we can take as a community to stop this Asian hate? Maybe not permanently, because we always know there is a strain in America that has that vitriolic hate. I'm not saying it defines the whole country, but it's there, unfortunately. It's part of our legacy. And so what are some ways that we can perhaps mitigate it for the time being?
I think for Stop Asian Hate and practically for any other movement for minority groups, it's just regarding each other as human beings. I mean, people need to start realizing that what we look like doesn't define who we are and shouldn't define who we choose to become either. I think that one main reason a lot of these hate crimes actually start is because these people objectify people of minority groups, and these powerful people in society, our politicians or just government officials, they stay neutral. Like, they just don't support, but they also don't condone these acts, and it just continues happening. I think we should start standing up for ourselves together as this combined community, because most, if not all, of our minority groups have been pitted against each other at some point in history, but I think it just makes us powerless to allow ourselves to be competing that way. And I think we should just unite each other and stand up for ourselves together. One main thing we can do to condone any sort of hate towards Asians is mainly to lobby these people in power. They don't seem to be willing to do as much, so we kind of have to force them into giving us the privileges that they have. And it's definitely very unfair, and I think it's a very difficult task, but it's one of the best chances we have at creating any sort of change, because asking a couple people around here isn't going to create as much change as asking someone super powerful to actually create some sort of change in society, because they have this position that to actually create some sort of change.
Yeah, Swetha put it really eloquently, and she touched on all the points that I also wanted to touch upon. So I'm just going to kind of go back to kind of like the running theme that we've been saying throughout this episode is understand that the Asian narrative is so diverse. There's so many stories out there.
For sure, yeah.
There's so many different, each group has their own struggles. Each group looks different, and it doesn't matter how different they look, because when it's coming to combat any kind of prejudice, it doesn't have to be Stop Asian Hate. It could be Black Lives Matter. It could be anything out there. Is that like, we are born the way we look, but the thing is, like, racism and prejudice are not things that we are innately born with. It comes from the environment we are around. It comes from like the society we live in. It comes from the ideas that we choose to believe in, which is not, it's our own choice. And if we just make these better choices, that's the best way that we can combat this prejudice, because in our current society, these are the choices we make. But what if, okay, our generation, we decide to make some different choices, and we teach our kids in the next generation, don't make the same choices that potentially like the past generation made. And so maybe like it's not going to happen that quickly, but somewhere down the line, prejudice is always going to exist, like Lauren said, but depending on the choices we make, eventually one day it's going to be something that I wish could be just like stuck in our history books, and we'll look back on it and say like, hey, this is a COVID pandemic. Do you remember when such and such happened in year such and such? And it was just like, wow, how the heck did they even live through that time?
Yeah.
It's kind of like how we look upon, like, I guess, like the Great Depression or like World War II, and they're like, how'd you do it? How'd you do it without like completely like collapsing on the inside?
Yeah.
I think I watched it. I think there's a very I think a viral like TED Talk video about a guy named Daryl Davis. He's a black man, and I think my idea of combating hate sort of comes from that. And in it, he talks about his experience as a black man and how he actually, I think he befriended a KKK leader, and he eventually, over the years, he got him to quit the KKK. And this KKK leader, he was like the national leader. And he, I think over just getting to know him, talking with him, and really getting to the root of his prejudices and just being with him one-on-one, he was able to sort of like break down those walls slowly. And eventually, that man, he came around. And I've seen that happen multiple times before. I saw it happen with like there was an ex neo-Nazi who did the same thing. He helped talk other Nazi members out of their vitriolic beliefs. And I feel like that is perhaps the one way in this world that's filled with echo chambers and hyperpolarization of two sides and this fanaticism. And I think it's just really sitting down and talking with the other side. Now, maybe I know it's going to be hard. Like, it's going to be hard for me to sit down with someone who calls me like, I don't want to say those words, but like those, like a slur or something. And it's hard. But I think, as Kathy said, hate is not innate. It is something that is taught. You're not born with it, you're taught it. And there was a part of the movie 42 about Jackie Robinson, that one, the one with Chadwick Boseman. There's a part where he comes out as Jackie Robinson and everyone's booing him because it was the 40s and there was hate against black people, and there was a guy who's shouting the N-word right next to his kid, and this kid, he admired Jackie Robinson. And all of a sudden his father just starts saying the N-word and the slur, and this kid looks really confused, and then for some reason he joins in on it because of all the peer pressure around, because his dad's doing it, and so he's like, oh, I guess I have to do it now. And so it's really, I think the solution really has to be for us to just start, well, not us, but like as a whole, we need to start sitting down with each other and say, hey, why are you feeling this way? I guess sort of, and I know the first few conversations are going to be absolute hell because like, do I want to sit down with a KKK member? Absolutely not. Absolutely not right now. No. Do I want to sit down with a racist? Absolutely not. And I think it's just, it's going to be a long, drawn out process. But I think if enough people reach out to the people on the other side, and if enough people take the time to make that, to cross the divide, to bridge the divide, then maybe it can open up a new world of understanding, a new world of tolerance. Now, obviously, me saying that, I sound like a complete idiot and a completely naive person, considering, just especially like how hated like Joe Manchin is for wanting to say, oh, let's everyone sit down, Republicans, Democrats, talk, let's all talk, and everyone on both sides like, oh no, you can't do that, screw you. And I know he's on to a point somewhere. But again, it's about, I think we'll probably end up having those conversations later in this development of ours.
I think there was one thing that I saw, actually in my APUSH textbook. there was one thing from, I think it was the early 1900s. It was a specific speech. I forgot the name of the speech. But there was this one word that's really stuck out to me, was invisible framework, which is kind of exactly what I feel is going on in our world, is that this cancel culture, these things like when people need to speak up the most, when people need to come to the table the most, it's not happening because of this invisible framework, this invisible barrier that is blocking people. It's like, personally, as somebody who is not as caught up with the news as I would like to be, sometimes I'm scared to ask like, hey, what's going on? Because I'm afraid that like, I don't know what's going on and somebody else is going to come after me and be like, how can you not know what's going on? So it's just like, I want to be part of the conversation, but how do I get in on that conversation? And I just feel like slowly it's going to be hard, because it could be a snowball effect in the opposite direction, but it's just really open up those conversations. Once you look back past the color of your skin, you look past the name, you look past the label, you look past like per se the block, is that you realize like these are people just like you or me, and we have, like Swetha, Lawrence, you guys all said, it's like our narratives are so different.
And any last words that anyone wants to contribute, say to our audience before we wrap up?
Like you guys said a little bit earlier, this conversation doesn't just have to take place with people, that could be strangers to us. It could take place with within our family, within, people we know, our peers, our friends, anyone that, just needs help understanding, or I do know a lot of my friends and a lot of peers in my classes have talked to their conservative parents and been like, hey, why do you feel this way? Why do you think that this is the only way people can live? Why do you think humans have to be defined by this certain way? And really questioning just their parents and their family, and questioning, people around them, has definitely led to some changes. And I think, don't be afraid to take that first step and actually just, question the people around you, and really, try to instill this idea that we're all human. We're all, the exact same person inside. We're not, completely different. The only thing that changes us is physical traits, and nothing really past that. And I think, everything else is instilled by society, like Kathy said a little bit earlier. And that's something that we should definitely keep in mind going into the future.
And one more thing is that COVID right now, everything economically, socially, everything online, it's a very, very difficult time. So we're not saying pressuring you to go out and do all of these things. It's that if you are able to, we'd love for you to join in on the conversation. Help us out however you can, but know that change happens at an individual level, and you need to take care of yourself first before you can positively influence others. And just the last thing that I want to just like reemphasize over and over is that everything that you decide to say, you decide to do, is a choice. It's not somebody else. It should not be somebody else putting words in your mouth. It's you going out to research the facts, knowing that these are people, and you making your own decision, your own opinion after knowing the full picture.
Great note to end on, Kathy. Great note. And with that, we'll wrap it there. Thank you all for listening to Season 2, Chapter 8 of APN's Waveform. APN stands with the Asian American community during these trying times, and we denounce all forms of hatred against any social group, especially those that have experienced historical oppression. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more of this content. Don't forget to also watch APN's weekly shows every Friday at 1 p.m. This has been Lawrence. Tune in next time on APN's Waveform.